there's no denying it. Power armor is really damn cool. Aesthetically pleasing, extremely powerful, and intertwined with the idea of Fallout as a whole brand. There's a reason it is planted on most of the box art for the games, why a T-51 helmet was once offered as a promotional item, and why there was an entire mechanical overhaul for it in Fallout 4. But as cool as power armor is, it's not without its problems. Problems with value, expectation, and fan-specific idealism absolutely plague the sets of combat suits. Let's discuss the problems with power armor. Value is perhaps a bit on the arbitrary side. Individuals can and will place different levels of importance or desire on equally different things. Value can be the generalized collection of these opinions, yet an individual may not care about what the collective thinks. When it comes to the value of a video game item, we'll look at three things: rarity, usability, and aesthetic. We're not going to look at this from an in-lore perspective, though it will be brought up from time to time. Rather, we're looking at it from the perspective of a seasoned Fallout player. Rarity is likely the biggest complaint people have over power armor. So much you probably, correctly, assumed it would be discussed here when you read the title. And why not? They're everywhere. They litter the various wastelands, so much so that the player character could arguably turn the various spare suits into furniture. As the titles increase, so did the sets of power armor that got shoved into the games. More and more opportunities to find them. As implied, it didn't start off this way. Originally, you could only collect the suits in a fixed amount of locations within the first 2 games. These were end-game armor, in 3 in New Vegas, mid-game armor. And as of Fallout 4 and 76, they transformed into early game gear, becoming very easy to come across, particularly in the case of 4, where there's a set of T-45 the game expects you to find not even 15 minutes into the title. There have been attempts to level this. One would assume with the 3D games, the mere fact that these suits are now inhabiting a large open world space should mean the suit to world map ratio is better balanced. Such isn't really the case in practice, but in theory, it should. A more active attempt made itself known in the post-classic titles, which featured the power armor training perk. The system removes the ability to use power armor entirely until the perk is attained by a quest completion and conversing with the right NPCs. It attempts to balance the abundance of power armor, but such has never been required in Fallout 1 or 2, so the lore and mechanical existence of it can fill off. Plus, the player can get it pretty early on, the midway point in Fallout 3 or even earlier in New Vegas if one is rather adventurous, arguably making it pretty redundant. There's Fallout 4's Fusion Core system, something designed to encourage the player to only use the suits during important moments, making the already mentioned T-45 at the beginning of the game feel like a sample of a new system rather than an award in itself. That said, fusion cores are so plentiful it becomes irrelevant. At the same time, players argue that the cores burn out too fast, which makes the system feel at odds with lore functionality. 76 has both of the prior systems. Sorta. Specifically, it uses the fusion core system of Fallout 4, and while there's no power armor training perk in 76, the game requires the player to reach a specific level before they can wear certain sets. It's a similar practice of locking power armor out until the player reaches a certain threshold of some design, but here a level rather than a quest reward. Which is better is up to the player. Classic stylings makes the sets very limited and most rare. They can be bought for an extremely high price, given for reaching a specific point, or even earned for trekking in a dangerous area. Post-classic stylings makes the sets very abundant, as they can be looted from dead power armor users, but it requires the player to reach a moment before being able to use them. It's a hard cap up until that point, perhaps making the player feel like they earned the right to use it, but also may make them feel guided to it. And the modern style makes power armor accessible very early on with a soft cap of fusion cores. As an idea, it's a decent balancing mechanic and should mean that power armor is still rare in employment due to the finite supply of cores. But in actuality, it doesn't work out that way due to the amount of cores that even a casual player will acquire. Rarity perhaps needs to be revisited in the future, a new system or an overhaul of a prior system to keep power armor feeling special. Usability is another consideration. Classic Fallout and Fallout 4 have some of the strongest showcases for the sheer power of, well, power armor. It's resisting a great deal of damage, increasing the strength of the users to hold heavier weapons, more for the case of classic Fallout, and honestly making the player feel unstoppable when using it, especially in Fallout 4 with the UI changes and sound design. The weakest showing is perhaps Fallout 3 and New Vegas, more on the side of Fallout 3 where power armor wasn't very strong. While still technically the most powerful type of armor you can acquire, the extra damage prevented by it was really minuscule compared to other high-tier armor, enhanced by the laughable lack of differences between T-45 and Enclave power armor. which was supposed to be Advanced Power Armor Mark II. More to the point, T45, which is what the Brotherhood of Fallout 3 used, was kind of the entry-level power armor at the time the game was produced. We're focusing on at the time the game was produced, so things like T60, X01, and Excavator really didn't exist yet. T45 was the first one that was functional and employed in the war, but it was the weakest set at the time the game was released. T51 was the next step, followed by Advanced Power Armor, and then Advanced Power Armor Mark II. The latter was the strongest armor you can get in Fallout 2. In Fallout 3, stat-wise, there's no real significant difference between T45 and the retconned Advanced Power Armor Mark II, short of bonus stats. Despite the massive tier difference, they both offered the same damage resistance of 40. T51 resisted more than that with 50, and that resisted as much as the Broken Steel Hellfire Power Armor. Basically, the lore looked like this, but the gameplay was actually this. Yes, I'm getting into lore quite a bit here, because it doesn't really show the usable value of the different power armor sets when the stats don't at least have some reflection of what the game tells us. They're all just tossed around with little rhyme and reason. It would have been better if Enclave Power Armor was some new, rushed together form of Advanced Power Armor that they developed after the destruction of the Oil Rig and Navarro. But no, it's supposed to be what Fallout 2's strongest set of power armor was. Huh? And as a bit of a bonus thing to this disappointment, while combat armor is sometimes rightfully placed in the second tier next to power armor, the damage resistance difference of some of those various sets is so mild that the benefits feel inconsequential. Seriously, Ranger Battle Armor has 39 damage resistance, T45 has 40, Enclave Power Armor has 40. It just kind of makes power armor feel none too oppressive until we get to T51. Now, New Vegas handled this a bit better. There's at least a sensible difference in stats between T45, T51, and Advanced Power Armor. The cut Shock Trooper armor would have taken a very serious jump up and would have been sensible if it was going to be the Advanced Power Armor Mark II, given it's the same model as the Enclave Power Armor 3, though it's also possible that was just a placeholder. Regardless, even though the differences here are sensible and fitting to the tiers of power armor, they didn't feel all that particularly strong to me. Better than 3's, yes, but still not quite as fulfilling as what the classic titles did. It doesn't help that the post-classic Fallout power armors all look scrawny in comparison to classic and moderns. They just don't have that intimidation bulk that they packed. They look like they're just heavy metal suits. The ones in classic and modern look like powered armor, strong, destructive, the kind of thing that would tear you to shreds no matter who was inside. Still, aesthetic value is completely personal, and while many do favor the bigger suits, others may not enjoy them that much and like the more sleek design. I'll go with that. The aesthetic argument is completely subjective, much less fact-based in comparison to usability and rarity. For that reason, it's hard to put more blanket ideas. I will say I personally feel that suits should be large and imposing, but there's aspects I don't like about it. The suits are so large in Fallout 4 that it becomes more mech in design, right down to robot hands. And that part I just do not like. I would prefer it was something the user wore, like regular armor, and not operate like a vehicle or puppet master. The very existence of power armor in each installment is pretty much an expected requirement. And why not? It's become synonymous with Fallout from the very first title, with the T51 helmet slapped right on the cover. The same was followed up with Fallout 2, Tactics, 3, 4, and 76. The exception came in the form of New Vegas with the riot gear and Brotherhood of Steel. Funny, given that the Brotherhood is also tied together with power armor, often creating this forced tunnel that, because power armor is expected, the Brotherhood is also expected as a means for the player to have access to power armor. This can impact the creativity of a story and make a veteran player roll their eyes, muttering, "How predictable." Thing is, power armor is a pre-war construct by the US military and evidently private businesses. As such, despite its frequent prevalence by the Brotherhood, it's not the inherent property of that group, even if there's something of a splinter group successor to the military. The Enclave, being a continuation of the US government, may be able to make the claim, but in the Wasteland, law and order takes a whole new meaning. Thus, power armor is by no means constrained to either the Brotherhood or the Enclave. There have been some steps taken to reinforce power armor as free game. For instance, in Fallout 2, the Brotherhood had a very limited appearance in the title, with 3 outposts, 2 of which had rather unimportant NPCs. One could get a set of power armor in the destroyed Mariposa military base, rather than going through their BOS. Though the Enclave is the biggest prevalence of power armor in that game, and at the time was likely looked at as the evil Brotherhood by some players. and Fallout 4, for all its abundance and thus lower value of power armor and a heavy use of the Brotherhood, did one thing well. It spread out the presence of power armor between various groups. You could find gunners and raiders with a set. And while both of these games are pretty flawed in separating power armor from the Brotherhood, at least told the player that there are other groups or means to access power armor. New Vegas is arguably worth a mention, as while that game did use both groups as a means for obtaining the power armor training perk, they're at least far from the main spotlight. They do have involvement with the main story as an objective, but they don't hog it. They're somewhat closer to Fallout 1's presentation in that regard. Separating power armor from the Brotherhood is a difficult task. When you think of one, you will think of the other. However, the games need to reinforce the idea that the faction doesn't need to exist in a title just so there's an excuse to have the suits available for the player. Old military bases are an easy option. Another tech-focused group could be created if absolutely needed. And there's even the possibility that some specific NPCs just happen to have them, likely bosses. Regardless, separating the two identities can help future narratives. Now, another aspect from the fan perspective is what the ideal system of power armor would look like, ranging from the number of suits in the game, how they handle, where they would be found, what factions would utilize them, and what sets would even be available. Almost each new game has introduced a new set of power armor, and each new generation of game has offered an overhaul and how they are found and utilized. With these differences, many fans have taken different ideas for how they should be implemented, which can make some feel better or worse when a new presentation is made. For some, the continuous new introduction of the different sets of power armor can really impact their suspension of disbelief. This is amplified in 76 with things like Hellcat and Excavator, not to mention all the skins that are available, arguably turning them into a bit of a mockery. However, some do not even want power armor in the first place, perhaps feeling that the Wasteland doesn't need these giant takey suits to be interesting. That said, others may actually enjoy the abundance of such, even if rarity and overall value takes a significant hit. Gameplay styles have varying degrees of feelings. Some just want it to be armor, while others love the mechanical feeling. Some prefer the gatekeeping of the power armor training perk, while others want to slip it on and go. My favorite recommendation is the idea of turning it into a skill. Make it so that anyone can use it, but using it well is another matter. More efficient skill could arguably make it lighter on fusion core usage, while perhaps allowing the player to move faster and maybe even have slightly improved damage resistance, perhaps 10% more at max skill. Though there still will be the problem of people speeding that skill, improving it before even hopping into a set. Maybe there's a few gatekeeping aspects, perhaps it doesn't become available as a skill until one is entered. Maybe more skill points are required for each 10 points to positive. Maybe another skill needs to be maxed out first. Different ideas, different considerations. Regardless, all these preferences can impact the overall opinions of the game as a final product. Not meeting the ideals of various outlooks can create disappointment. Arguably, this is unfair to developers, but at the same time, it's a bit of an unavoidable problem from having different styles, even if the intent is improved player enjoyment. Still, it would be foolish to believe it's possible to please everyone. Each person is different. You yourself likely have your own preferences. What are they? Let me know in the comments below. And a special thanks to my channel members, especially my members, ThriceOver members, like That Crazy Game Developer and Danny McPhee. If you'd like to support me and join as well, I'd be more than happy. Otherwise, like, share, subscribe, all that typical YouTube stuff. Thank you. Have a good one.